Hi, just confirming everyone can hear me. If people can just give me a thumbs up, I'll be able to scroll through and see. Thank you. Excellent. All right. So I'm going to get started shortly. We had some folks wanting to join in, but I don't see them. And just for the sake of time, I know the administration wanted to get on to other business today. I don't know if Sagun from Beckma has joined us. No. Has, okay. No. All right, well, let me just get this one. Okay. All right, well, I'm assuming everyone's here from the administration. And I have John and okay. All right, well, I'm gonna go ahead. I don't have a gavel, so I'll use my water bottle as the official check-in. Anyway, so welcome everyone. My name is Lydia Edwards. I'm the chair of government operations. Today is April 7th, 2020. This is hearing as regards to docket 0100, a petition for a special law and act authorizing additional licenses for the sale of alcoholic beverages to be drunk on the premises in Boston, and docket 0281, petition for a special law regarding an act authorizing additional licenses for the sale of alcoholic beverages to be drunk on the premises in Boston. Again, I'm City Council Lydia Edwards, Chair of the Committee on Government Operations. And we're here today for a virtual hearing on those two matters. These matters were referred to the committee on January 29, 2020. In accordance with Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 executive order modifying certain requirements of the open meeting law and relieving public bodies of certain requirements, including the requirement that public bodies conduct its meetings in public place that is open and physically accessible, the City Council is conducting this hearing virtually via Zoom. This enables the City Council to carry out its responsibilities while adhering to the public health accommodations and ensuring public access to its deliberations through adequate alternative means. The public may watch this hearing via live stream at www.boston.gov/city-council-TV. It will also be rebroadcasted at a later date on Comcast 8 RCN 82 version 1964, or Verizon, 1964. For public testimony, written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.go@boston.gov and will be made part of the record and available to the councilors. Both of these home rule petitions would establish additional licenses for the sale of alcoholic beverages in the city of Boston. The licenses authorized under these proposals would be non-transferable and revert back to the city of Boston between owners. Docket 0100, sponsored by Mayor Martin J. Walsh, would authorize the licensing board for the city of Boston to grant 184 non-transferable liquor licenses for the sale of alcoholic beverages for a period of 3 years, subject to certain conditions. And docket 0281, sponsored by Councilor Frank Baker, would expand the number of non-transferable licenses for the sale of alcoholic beverages to 150 and would give the licensing board the authority to grant such licenses subject to certain conditions and based upon neighborhood. The mayor's proposal also creates an umbrella license for qualifying projects. So that is the basic understanding of the two matters before us. I just wanted to say I have heard from individuals why this hearing should go on at this time. I believe, quite frankly, this conversation didn't start at this moment. And certainly if it had finished and we provided these resources before, we wouldn't need it today. I firmly believe that part of the recovery of any part of Boston's recovery is going to be giving all the resources that we need to small businesses, including if there are additional licenses. I do know, and I've heard that there will be some restaurants that don't make it and their licenses may be available at the end of this. I understand that might be something that we will have to deal with, but ultimately I don't think that we should be planning for an aftermath. We should still be planning for resources that our restaurants have needed and still need. Again, this is a matter of adding tools to the toolbox. It's not replacing the vital conversations that we are having about the emergency funding that businesses need right now. It is not replacing the conversations that we are having and had about renters and the need for people to get resources right now. So this is just a matter, I believe, of the city council doing its job and having this conversation. So I'm going to turn it over now to the administration to discuss. I'm sorry, I apologize. Let me recognize I have my colleagues who have joined me today. I apologize. Vice Chair of the Committee on Government Ops, City Councilor at Large, Michael Flaherty. We also have with us District City Councilor and sponsor of docket 0281, Councilor Frank Baker from District 3. And we also have District City Councilor from South Boston, Councilor Ed Flynn, and City Council President from District 7, Councilor Kim Janey, and District City Councilor from West Jamaica Plain, West Roxbury, both. City Councilor Matt O'Malley, District 6. And am I missing any of my colleagues? I do apologize. I don't see you on the screen. Have I gotten all of my colleagues? Very well. I'm going to go ahead and turn over to the administration. I believe we have representing the administration. We have Chief John Barrows. And was there someone from licensing today as well? Apologize if I'm not seeing them. I'm scrolling through as we go. If we can unmute Chief Barrows.
Thank you, Councilor.
Chief, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Councilor Edwards and all of the other members of the council who are here with us today. For the record, my name is John Barrows, the Mayor's Chief Economic Development. I am in fact joined by, and can see, Kathleen Joyce, who is the chair of the Boston Licensing Board.
My apologies,
Thank you for having
Kathleen.
both here today. Councilor, I think you're doing a great job of hosting a meeting on Zoom. So thanks again for extending this opportunity. Before I get into the proposal details, I'd be remiss if I did not acknowledge, as you did, Councilor Edwards, the context of this conversation has obviously changed since the first time the home rule petition was filed as part of Mayor Walsh's 2019 and 20 state legislative agenda. While we still believe this legislation provides important increases in flexibility to our current liquor license quota system, and that those changes will ultimately help our small business community, we also know that it is not the primary challenge facing small businesses at this moment. To the small business communities, small business owners that are watching right now, please be assured that we are here for you and are working around the clock to ensure that you survive these challenging times. You are and continue to be the heart of Boston's economy, providing over 170,000 jobs and generating $15 billion in annual revenues. Your success is our success, and we are committed to helping you in every way that we can. Over the last several weeks, we've been hosting hundreds of small businesses on conference calls. In fact, we have another one today at 3 p.m. So if you can join us for the latest on resources for small businesses. I am in awe of the resilience, creativity, and even optimism during this pandemic. I encourage everyone to please visit Mayor Walsh's Economic Development webpage to learn more about the resources available to you today. Encourage everyone to particularly pay attention to the Small Business Relief Fund that we are currently accepting applications for. I now want to turn to the Mayor's Home Rule petition pending before this committee. We can all agree that as municipal officials, we want to foster neighborhood environments in which people can live, work, shop, and eat. Small businesses and local food establishments are an integral part of making that happen. Unfortunately, not every neighborhood has the same portfolio of small businesses, and anything we can do to encourage a full complementary of small businesses, particularly those where people can gather, where families can meet, and where business can be transacted, then we would be doing a lot of justice for the economic future of that neighborhood. In order to support our thriving communities and these businesses, Mayor Walsh filed docket number 0100 to promote economic growth by increasing our liquor license quota. The current number of licenses per state law is not sufficient for neighborhoods and does not correspond with Boston's continued population growth and real estate boom. Therefore, Mayor Walsh's proposal would add a total of 184 non-transferable liquor licenses to be phased in over 3 years. The breakdown of the licenses are as followed: 5 licenses, 3 all alcohol and 2 malt and wine, a year for 3 years for each of the following neighborhoods: Dorchester, East Boston, Hyde Park, Jamaica Plain, Mattapan, Mission Hill, Roslindale, Roxbury, and Charlestown. That's 135 total. 5 licenses, 3 all alcohol and 2 malt and wine, a year for Main Street districts. That's 15 total. And then there would be 10 citywide, 7 all alcohol and 3 malt and wine licenses a year for 3 years, with no more than 3 a year able to go to neighborhoods of Back Bay, Beacon Hill, and the North End. That's 30 total. One all alcohol for Lawn on D at the Convention Center, and 1 all alcohol for the Bruce Bowling Municipal Building in Roxbury, 1 all alcohol license for the Huntington Theater in the Fenway Kenmore neighborhood, and 1 all alcohol license for the Boston Center for the Arts in the South End. This legislation also creates a 1-year cool-off period for any liquor license operator who sells their transferable license, barring them from applying for a non-transferable restricted license for the same location. Lastly, the mayor's home rule petition also creates project certifications by the Boston Licensing Board for large commercial and mixed-use developments, under which each individual operator may apply for a license from the Boston Licensing Board without impacting the city's current liquor license cap. Eligible projects must be over 700,000 square feet, with at least 125,000 square feet of which needs to be commercial space. There will be an annual administrative fee of $150,000 for these projects, and the project certification licenses will help protect the neighborhood licenses that would be allocated. We believe this proposal is a balanced approach that will help attract new establishments, assist small businesses, and provide an equitable entry point for entrepreneurs, particularly in historically underserved neighborhoods. However, as we've discussed already, due to the severity of the issues before us, I think it would be beneficial to revisit this matter in a few weeks ahead and adjust as necessary to best serve current and future businesses. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak. I look forward to working with the council to advance this legislation.
Thank you very much. Before I go to Kathleen, I didn't know if, to comment on either one of the dockets, because Councilor Baker has also filed a hearing order to be heard today. Do you mind, Kathleen, if I turn it over to Councilor Baker to see if he wanted to, for any opening remarks? Councilor Baker, I apologize for not going to you first. You have this docket to I don't know, discuss your docket or distinguishing it from the mayor's, and just a quick summary, if you would, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to start by saying that this hearing was filed and scheduled prior to us knowing the severity of coronavirus. I know there may be potential for many of the current liquor licenses that are already in use to return to the city. However, we were not in this predicament when the legislation was filed. The intent is to help local businesses thrive within our neighborhoods. This home rule petition for a special law regarding an act to authorize additional licenses for the sale of alcoholic beverages to be drunk on the premise in Boston will amend the Massachusetts general laws to specifically add the City of Boston Licensing Board may grant up to 150 non-transferable liquor licenses over a 3-year period for the sale of alcoholic beverages to be drunk on premise. With that being said, I have a concern about what the economy could potentially look like and how many licenses will definitely come back to the city. And those licenses will probably be the non-transferable neighborhood licenses. But the position that we're in, I can understand that, you know, trying to get something to the legislature to see if there's help after this coronavirus, and I don't want to miss that opportunity. So what I wanted to suggest to the chair was take my legislation, because I think the mayor's legislation, there are some good parts in it, the Lawn on D and different organizations that are going to need their liquor licenses. But I think that is complex and I think we can wait on it. We can, as district city councilors, file those as home rule petitions, as district city councilors, potentially District 2, Eddie could file for Lawn and D as a separate petition in a couple months. With that being said, I would like to put forth, I talked with Christine a bit before this to amend my home rule. Instead of doing a 3-year, 5 licenses, I would like to put something forth that would just be 1 year, 1 year, 3 licenses to all those neighborhoods that we had talked about adding Jamaica Plain. Jamaica Plain was not in there. So 3 licenses, one of them being beer and wine. That would cover us in this time in case we need to get something up to the State House. And I don't see the need in anybody's neighborhood being more than 1 or 2 licenses in the next 6 months. We'll be fortunate if there's 3 in the whole city. I think that this coronavirus, the aftermath is going to be far worse than what we're going through right now in the economy. So I would like to, throw that out there, see what people think. It would be much simpler legislation, and it would at least have something at the State House for us to be able to talk to and of course it would be amendable. We could talk to our state legislators, and if it was an appetite for it, it would be there, and we could pass that, and it wouldn't flood the market like in Dorchester. If in 3 years we added 15 licenses, high likelihood that would absolutely flood the market, and it would make it difficult for anybody that is trying to keep their doors open. So I hope I said enough. If people want to see that, see that type of changes happen, I can have Christine send it off to the chair. Just throw that out there. Or we could keep it simple and just talk about what is in front of us here today. Very similar legislation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Councilor Baker. So if I understand your suggested amendment for your home rule, is that you basically just limit it to 1 year, 3 licenses to the named neighborhoods.
Yes, that is correct. And
Okay.
Jamaica Plain was never originally named, so we'd be adding Jamaica Plain also.
And adding Jamaica Plain.
Yeah, and just
And
a 1 year term.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And so again, we were going to go to, I want to recognize, I believe we've been joined also by Councilor at Large, City Councilor at Large, Anissa Sabi George. To Ms. Joyce, Kathleen Joyce, my apologies.
No problem. Thank you for inviting me to participate in today's hearing. My name is Kathleen Joyce, and I'm chair of the Licensing Board for the City of Boston. The Licensing Board is the regulatory body that issues the liquor licenses for the sale and service of food and alcohol and regulates the establishments that do the same. Before I get into the rest of my discussion on the legislation before you, it's important to remember that the forced closures of dining rooms in our restaurants means the entire restaurant industry will take a hard hit in the months to come. It remains to be seen how the restaurant industry will recover, particularly small, non-chain restaurants. To that end, the board has been working closely with our licensees during this time to ensure an open dialogue and providing them with the information and available resources. We have a weekly phone call with the attorneys that appear before our board, and we take questions and we try to offer them all the resources that we have available to us. The board has received hundreds of calls and emails from licensees across the city, both large and small, notifying the board of temporary closures. These calls continue to come in on a daily basis. We are collecting this information to share with policymakers. As the council is aware, the number of liquor licenses in the city is established by the legislature. The availability of a license at any given time is fluid. Unrestricted licenses are routinely transferred between businesses, or if unrestricted, returned to the city upon the closure of a business. responsibility for licensing the sale and distribution of alcoholic beverages is shared between the local licensing authority, our board, and the ABCC. Procuring a license involves 3 steps: approval by our board, where we make a public need determination, approval by the ABCC, and the actual issuance of the license by our board with certain conditions. The licensing board holds a public hearing to consider any new application for a license. First, the board looks to determine whether there's public need for the type of license at the proposed location. Second, the board looks at the character and fitness of the applicant. Together, we use these determinations to figure out whether or not granting the license would be in the interest of the common good at this location. Once the board determines that the granting of the license should be made, the board will then look to whether there is an available license for which the applicant qualifies. If there is an available license, the board will grant the license and the application will be forwarded to the ABCC for their review and approval. If I could take a minute to talk about what public need means in terms of the board. Public need is the legal standard applied by the board in determining whether to grant a new license or to approve the transfer of a license to a new location. This is a well-articulated standard that includes factors such as the type of license sought at the particular location, whether it's wine and malt or all alcohol, the type of operation at the proposed location, whether it's a small family-owned Mexican restaurant surrounded by large Italian steakhouses or sports bars, and the number of existing licenses in the surrounding areas. At one point, the Seaport used to be considered underserved, but now has many licenses. The North End is saturated. Public support of neighbors and elected officials, and the impact on the public good like traffic, parking, trash, quality of life concerns. The determination of public need at a specific location for a specific proposal is fluid. Where the board may have found public need in a specific neighborhood at one time, as I had said, the Seaport area in 2006, there may not currently exist a public need for a restricted license. As such, we review each application on its individual merits and we don't speak to hypotheticals. In 2006 and 2014, the legislation sought to create new licenses for specific areas in the city that were underserved by liquor licenses at that time. In 2006, the legislature increased the number of available licenses in the city with a focus on Main Street districts, empowerment zones, and municipal harbor zones. In 2014, the legislation had a specific focus on Main Street districts and specific neighborhoods: Dorchester, Roxbury, Mattapan, Jamaica Plain, Mission Hill, Roxbury, East Boston, and Hyde Park. It's important for the council to note that there are certain areas of the city that do not qualify for either a 2006 restricted license or a 2014 restricted license. For example, Alston and Brighton, in certain areas of South Boston. Even if an applicant in one of those areas demonstrated a public need to the board, the only option would be to purchase a license on the open market and apply for a transfer. Growth in our neighborhoods is directly tied to restaurants and restaurants that have liquor licenses. The board is sensitive to existing license holders and how additional liquor licenses may impact them. But these additional licenses will provide flexibility and an entry point for the small business owner who would otherwise be prohibited from entering the Boston restaurant market. I'm happy to answer any questions as to the specific pieces of legislation before you. As a regulator, I don't have an opinion, but I'm interested to see how these move through the process.
Thank you very much. I really do appreciate. Is there anyone else from the administration who needed or wanted to testify? We do have, we'll start with some questions. I'm going to skip the opening remarks from my colleagues, but I wanted to make sure that if we had questions for the administration, we could ask them. And then we'll move on to the comments from the public and folks invited to come testify today. I do believe we'll be getting a copy of the changes to Councilor Baker's proposed hearing order or home rule petition. So when that comes out, it'll be emailed to everyone. It'll be part of the record. Thank you very much for that quick turnaround. Yes, yeah, Flaherty, Flynn. I will turn it over shortly. Just want to make sure I have everybody. Flaherty, Flynn. Councilor Baker, Flaherty, Flynn, Matt, Kim. Is Councilor Sabi George still here? Okay. Well, we'll just go ahead with who has arrived. Councilor Baker, did you have any questions, or do we want to allow for the other colleagues to go ahead? Okay, they can go ahead.
have the other colleagues go ahead and come back to me at the end, please.
Okay.
Thank
I believe in order of arrival that I could see, again, I apologize, was on the screen, Council Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everyone, and I appreciate obviously Councilor Baker's amendments, and look forward to seeing those in writing when they get distributed. And just want to obviously maybe address Chief Barros. I know that there are a lot of moving parts today that were not here a month ago. This initially obviously was in response to food deserts, and then as you've seen, like I have, this has evolved into all of my colleagues and beyond, sort of tacking on, if you will, wanting more licenses to the point where we're now, I think the ask is 184, quite frankly, at a time when we're not quite sure that, most of the existing businesses are going to be viable. There's some talk that maybe as many as 25% of them will be closed for good, not just in our city, but across surrounding and abutting neighborhoods. So I have concerns. I want to make sure that we're treading lightly, because this is an industry that impacts a lot of businesses and a lot of employees, and making sure that we're taking prudent steps. And maybe through the chair, a friendly amendment is that those 184 non-transferables, maybe they get spread out instead of over 3 years. Maybe we talk about maybe over 5 years, just again as a stopgap. And more importantly, I'd love to see the administration set up a commission that takes a look at the COVID-19 impacts on our hotels, on our restaurants, on our bars and lounges, and maybe even at our creative economy, our theaters and our comedy venues, to see sort of what state they're in and whether or not they're all going to be able to reopen. So that's sort of our existing inventory. I have a lot of concerns about our existing inventory and our commitment to them, and sort of maybe a little bit of a less concern at sort of new and emerging ones that haven't started yet. I think that we have a responsibility to sort of our existing stakeholders and their employees to make sure that they're in a good position to succeed and move forward. So I look forward to participating on Chief Barros's call later this afternoon, but those are sort of some of my concerns. And also around the parameters, I believe it was, you had mentioned, Chief, 125,000 square feet of retail. I really probably think the focus should really be on sort of the divide should be small or large project review. I think when you have a large project review, which I believe is somewhere in the vicinity of over 50,000, that may be the threshold we want to look at. And I can think about some projects across the city that potentially are in that category that would benefit from this potential opportunity. But again, this started, I want to refocus everyone on where this started. This started as a need to address the city's food deserts. There were certain parts of our city that were in dire need of a shot of economic development, and also an opportunity to provide sort of smaller local proprietors with the opportunity to establish a business and get a footprint in their respective communities. And then it just has morphed into today's ask, which is 184 non-transferable license. My major concern is that we're basically going to taxi medallion this thing. And what I mean by that is when Uber and Lyft came on the scene, they've completely devalued the taxi license. And I sort of see a very similar trend here. So I'm cognizant and recognize that we do have some food deserts in our city, and I wholeheartedly support addressing that through sort of portions of this legislation, but I don't want to devalue the market and the industry, particularly at a time when you may have 25% of our businesses closing for good, and the only thing of value that they will actually have to help them, kind of get out of this or to pay some of their bills will be their liquor license. So again, I'm open ears here, but I want to make sure that we're treading lightly and we're recognizing the sort of the longer impacts on a bigger industry. And so I'd love to hear for sort of the chief in terms of what your thoughts are on, or even Commissioner Joyce in terms of, again, we need to address the food deserts, all on board for that. I just don't know if we should be allowing it to mushroom, particularly when we have businesses that will be hemorrhaging as a result of COVID-19 in the aftermaths that my colleague Council Baker referenced. We have no idea how devastating they're going to be. At the very least, either table this discussion or kind of maybe pare it down a little bit and start a commission that can address some of these issues. And then down the road, if we need to increase that capacity. So again, that's my question, or I'm opining on it, but I think there's some serious concerns here. We also have the issue that I don't know whether or not other establishment owners across the city are able to join in today. Hopefully we'll be able to hear from them, and they can give us a front row seat for what they're experiencing with respect to their rent, their mortgage, their employees, unemployment, their insurance, et cetera. All very big, important issues that we're not going to be able to solve at this hearing. But nonetheless, we should be very cognizant of that as leaders who are going to be making decisions that are going to have lasting impacts on their business and their families, as well as this industry. So thank you very much, Madam Chair, and look forward to hearing from the Chief and Commissioner with respect to what I just offered.
Thank you very much, Councillor Flaherty. Moving to Councillor Flynn, any questions about either to the administration or comments on the current 2 pending dockets? Councillor Flynn?
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards, and thank you to the administration that's here today. Chief Barrows and Kathleen Joyce, we have great respect for both of you and the work that you're doing. My comments are focused on something similar to what Councilor Flaherty echoed. I had the opportunity over the last month to talk to a lot of restaurant owners in my district due to the coronavirus. And many of them obviously are struggling a lot, told me that it might be very difficult for them to reopen. I talked to the Mass Restaurant Association, and they highlighted the same issues. And a lot of these restaurants employed so many workers. I look at it also from a jobs perspective. The dishwashers and the cooks and the bartenders and the cleaners. For a lot of them, they're immigrants, and some of them are also, it's their second job or third job, and they're working hard to make ends meet. And now they're out of a job, and unlikely what the status will be for that worker, unlikely to know what the status is for that restaurant or for that bar. There's just so many unanswered questions. If we go forward with adding several hundred more new licenses in the city, what impact would that have on the current restaurants or bars that are already struggling and or obviously shut down during this period of time? How do they get back on their feet? How do they pay their bills? But I think we need to have a meaningful conversation with restaurant owners, with neighborhoods, with the workers especially, and find out what they're thinking. I know Michael Flaherty mentioned having maybe a commission. I'd love to have I agree with them. I'd also like to have a city council hearing on the impact this would have on the workers. And I'm not for this proposal, or I'm not against this proposal. I think it's a good start, but there's just so many unanswered questions as we're in a recession right now. And it's going to be very difficult for this city. We're doing good work and reaching out to the small businesses, but it's going to be very difficult for a lot of these businesses to reopen. And I wouldn't be surprised if 30 or 40% of them don't open. What type of impact would that have on the small businesses in our restaurants, and especially their workers? So again, I just want to say thank you to Councilor Baker. I want to say thank you to Councilor Edwards, the administration, for starting this dialogue. And I'm looking forward to learning more, but I don't want to see us rush this. I think this is too important of a decision to rush. I think we really need to learn about what impact the coronavirus is going to have on our small businesses and our economy in Boston. Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Janey. If you're still available, Councillor Janey.
Hello, how
Oh,
are you?
great. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and to my colleagues and sponsor Baker, and certainly the mayor. This is an important conversation. Also reminded of my colleague, Councilor Flaherty's comments around why we were having this conversation. Certainly my district is underrepresented when it comes to liquor licensing. And this was seen as a path toward bringing more equity in terms of our process. I am deeply concerned given what our current state of affairs is, and that my district having some of these licenses, some of the neighborhood licenses that are already struggling. And I have a couple of businesses that have already closed, 2 of which have liquor licenses and that are now closed. And I am deeply concerned as to whether or not they will be able to reopen when the dust settles and it's safe to do so. And so I guess what I would be really interested in hearing throughout this conversation and subsequent conversations is how this effort will help get us on stable ground. So it's really twofold. One, about recovery from COVID-19 and the impact and how this can help us with that. But we also have to remember that we're starting with a $250,000 wealth gap as our starting point in the city of Boston when it comes to equity. And so one, we have to think about recovery efforts, but we also have to continue to be mindful and intentional around what our starting point was. And so I'd love to hear more about how this particular docket will help on those 2 fronts. Thank you, and that's it for me. Happy to sit back and listen.
Thank you very much. I just figure at this point we can continue with the counselors kind of opening questions and whatnot, and then if it's okay with Chief Barrows and Ms. Joyce, if it's okay with both of you to kind of take them in the collective and answer them. Some are more statements than specifics, but I just, for the sake of efficiency, and I do see that there are several local businesses who also want to speak on this matter as well. Is that okay with you, Chief Barrows, Ms. Lynch? Or Ms. Joyce, excuse me. Is that okay? Okay. Councillor O'Malley?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. I hope everyone is holding up well and safely, and your families as well. Thank you to the businesses who I know we all want to hear from, and thank you to the members of the mayor's administration who have done just remarkable work. I think that the fragility with which we are dealing is really underscored by this hearing. This is something the council has been working on for as long as I've been a member of this body, and long before that. A little less than 10 years ago, I was the government ops chair. Former councilor Ayanna Pressley had put forth a liquor license bill. It was one of her landmark achievements. We've been continuously doing this, and I want to specifically thank Councilor Baker and Councilor Flaherty for their leadership. I agree with the statements both of our colleagues made. It's an important tool that we need, but the new reality in a post-COVID-19 Boston and America is that there's going to be more pressing concerns to support these existing small businesses. So how do we strike that right balance? It's going to be difficult. A lot of this we are going to figure out as we go along, but we want to both allow for an opportunity for businesses once we get through this to thrive, new businesses to thrive, but we also need to make sure that we have protections and precautions in place for those existing businesses. I'm not sure any of us know how to figure that out, but it's certainly going to be something that we consider and deal with as we craft this, as we craft subsequent legislation and other supports for our small businesses and existing businesses. So thank all of you. Thank you, Madam Chair, for having this and convening this hearing. Thank you to my colleagues. Again, I want to support the maker, Councilor Baker, on his remarks, as well as Councilor Flaherty, who I think underscored the just how incredibly complicated this issue is now. And then my last question, or my only question, that was a statement. When the administration speaks on the letter from the mayor that accompanied the docket, which was a letter of January 7th. It sort of breaks down 3 bullet points where it talks about the 5 citywide alcohol license for Back Bay, Beacon Hill, North End, 5 citywide all alcohol licenses for Back Bay, Beacon Hill, the North End. And then the licensing board may grant up to 3 all alcohol 2 wine and malt licenses for Dorchester, East Boston, Hyde Park, Jamaica Plain, Mattapan, Mission Hill, Roxbury, Rosendale, Charlestown. And the 3rd bullet point reads, licensing board may grant up to 3 all alcohol licenses and 2 malt and wine licenses for areas designated as Main Streets District. West Roxbury was not included in either the 1st bullet point or the 2nd bullet point. So my question is West Roxbury included in that 3rd bullet point? Because of course there is a Main Streets District. And then the follow-up on that is other areas of West Roxbury, specifically Washington Street as you head towards Dedham, is not included, or even Spring Street as you head towards Dedham. Neither of those business areas are included in the Main Streets District. So would those still be available to get an additional license if we get to that point? So those are my questions. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Councilor O'Malley. Is Councilor Sabi George here?
I am still here. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the makers, of course. I think a lot of the points and questions have been made by my colleagues. So in the consideration of time, I'm going to leave my comments there, but I do appreciate everyone being present, being engaged here today in this conversation and throughout sort of this ordeal. I suppose a special thanks to Chief Barrows for his work, the administration's work on supporting our small businesses right now and as we speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to add some questions and then Councilor Baker, do you want to go before I go? I had some questions. Okay. So my questions and somewhat comments, just wanted to kind of go through a list. First, I agree with what everyone else has said, that the ability to recover from this moment is still unclear and how we're going to get forward. I do think it's worth noting that the businesses that have liquor licenses, those, as Councilor Janey noted, some have closed. Those with liquor licenses are likely to be able to recover faster than those that were struggling before without the liquor licenses. And so some of those places were already struggling, and some were hopeful, and I think they're even on today's call, can talk about their ability to even open in East Boston, which is definitely in need of more additional liquor licenses. It was dependent on additional licenses being available. So there is a lot of economies waiting and small businesses waiting to launch and we'll continue to wait because they didn't have liquor licenses available. I understand that there may be several liquor licenses returned back to the city, and the administration can answer this, if they're returned back to the city, they're not necessarily neighborhood specific, as I understand, as in the city isn't going to limit which neighborhoods get them. So are we just putting them back in the city to the same system that set them up in a way that they couldn't compete before? If you were a small business in East Boston or Mattapan and you weren't able to compete before for licenses, the fact that the city got a bunch of them back, unless I'm wrong, and the city can turn around and say they've come back to the city, we can now give them out based off neighborhood specificities and quotas, which are both suggested in the pending dockets. I didn't hear that listed as one of the options that the licensing board looks at. So, but if they can make it specific quotas versus just looking at the neighborhood surrounding the trash, the impact on so on and so forth, but maybe that's another option if those things are returned. And I would love at some point a follow-up conversation on the expected return of those licenses in terms of numbers. We don't have it right now, but I'd like that. I think because my colleagues have such great suggestions, the commission limiting the current docket to 1 year and 3 licenses, it's very clear for those who are on and listening today, this is not going to be a one and done conversation. It will probably likely take the time that it normally does with hearing orders from this to a working session to moving on, and then possibly also having to wait for the impact or looking at what's going on before this comes out of our body. So I wanted people to understand that process will have to, because of the good amendments and suggestions. And I also wanted to note and ask the administration if they're open to a placeholder amendable home rule petition that can go up to the State House, that the State House can amend depending on the pandemic and the need, and even our own suggestions, so that allow for us to get in line but adjust what we're asking for, depending on the pandemic. So those are kind of just my suggestions, and just wanted to be clear about everybody, to everybody, about how the process will likely have to continue in this conversation. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to kind of make a couple of points. And I think everybody seems to get the grasp of what we're trying to do here. So I think the way would like to see this happen is I'd like to see the mayor's legislation tabled. I think right now it's a little difficult to get into it and even try and make sure that we send up to the State House is going to be something everybody wants, the way we're doing business now. And to speak to the chair's point, there were some neighborhoods that were left out on this thing, the last legislation that happened. And I think with my changes, I'm trying to speak to those neighborhoods that weren't taken care of. They'll always be within those neighborhoods. And I think cutting off the last 2 years, so this would get us through till next year. We could, potentially, if there was more need, which again, I don't think there's going to be more need next year, we could refile for more licenses then. But I think this is a sort of measured approach to I think what we're trying to do here. So hopefully people are okay with the changes. And John, one question. I've heard a lot, 25%. Do you think that that's the number of businesses that are restaurants that are going to go out of business?
John?
No.
You're on mute.
Should I answer that right now?
Go. Yeah, you're good.
Okay. Yes. Councilor Baker, thank you for the question.
And John, before you continue,
yes.
Before you continue, since Councilor Baker was the last person to ask questions, you can feel free to answer all of our questions or address our comments, as well as Ms. Joyce at this point. We're just turning it back over to you. Okay.
Thank you very much. So I took notes here on all the questions and comments, and I'll try to get to them in general, and then really specifically to specific questions. I think it's important that I share that we, right in the beginning of the crisis, began surveying our small businesses. And so we have conducted every 10 days a survey of all our small businesses. And I'm going to share with you what we know about the small businesses to get to some of the questions. What we know now is that 75% of our small businesses lost at least 50% of revenues during those first 20 days of the crisis. We also know that 46% of our small businesses are now closed, some by order of governor, some by the fact that the economy just doesn't make sense for them to keep their doors open. We also know that of the small businesses that are open, that in fact, we are encouraging our small businesses to continue to, particularly the food businesses, to continue to sell food in terms of delivery and takeout. The question I continue to get from small businesses today in the food sector is, can you not help us get liquor licenses? Because of course it would help our takeout and would help our delivery, as the state amended the ability for small businesses to be able to sell with alcohol, with wine and beer particularly. And so the one regret is that we didn't move on this legislation earlier. Because if we did, we might have been better equipped to handle the COVID issue as it stands today, of the businesses that are introducing takeout or delivery, the food businesses that are introducing takeout or delivery. We are reporting that they are really excited to know that the governor lifted the issue of transportation and the permit needed for that, the issue of takeout for beer and wine sales. I'll also share that as we recover, in fact, we are. There were some comments about the. I think Councilor Farrelly started with a comment about the impact to the economy, and so we are assessing currently, and we'll continue to assess the impact.
You went on mute.
Oh,
There we
sorry
go.
about that. Oh, sorry. So let me just inform you on some of the studies that we are doing on the economy, and I'll give you some quick stats. I think it's good context for this conversation. So you will not be surprised to know that the industry that is the hardest hit industry right now in Boston because of the public health crisis is the accommodation and food services industry, which obviously includes restaurants, bars, hotels. And it is the hardest hit, and it's also the largest percentage of workers that are filing for unemployment today. And we've got a number of other industries, right behind that. You have home care, you have small businesses that are providing personal care, et cetera. And then when we look at it in terms of census tracts, the hardest industries that are hit in terms of employees that are filing for unemployment, you find that the census tracts will include your typical low-income neighborhoods. And so East Boston gets hit really hard in terms of percentages of workers. Dorchester, Roxbury, we see parts of Mattapan. And so you're not going to be surprised to see this map when we release it. And these are the maps where, I think that Councilor Baker's point and other councilors, in fact, we will see high percentages of businesses that will have a struggling time in trying to restart. We continue to see the same disparities that you have seen in other studies, be disparities around low-income neighborhoods. We're also seeing in our initial intake of applications to the Boston Relief Fund, we are seeing a high number of small businesses from these neighborhoods apply. We're seeing a high number of minority-owned businesses apply for relief. And so it correlates to some of the disparities that we've seen before. So I want to contest that the context has changed, that in fact, recognizing that the COVID issue puts us in a new place, and we should continue to analyze the economy and the issues our small businesses are dealing with, that we continue to find that the disparity is along the same lines of the disparities we found before, and that issuing new licenses to these neighborhoods that have been underserved will in fact enable us to have the tools that we need to help these neighborhoods get back on track and maybe come back quicker than they would otherwise. When we came out of the 2008 recession, all reports show that low-income neighborhoods and depending on how you look at demographics, racial demographics also show that certain communities lagged in recovery than other communities. It's a trend, and we find that trend will probably be the same this time around coming out of the COVID issue, that certain communities will lag in their recovery time to other communities. So we see the hardest hit communities be our low-income communities right now, and we'll be sharing those numbers shortly. And we think the recovery will be such. Now, let me get to some specific questions that were asked. And we have specifically Matt O'Malley, Councilor O'Malley asked the question of West Roxbury. And yes, Councilor, the West Roxbury Main Street District will be included or is included in the mayor's legislation. And the citywide liquor licenses would also apply to the other parts of West Roxbury outside of the Main Street District. Councilor Edwards, you asked a question about amendable. Would we be in support of it being amendable? And I think that we are. The administration is in support of it going to the state amendable. And then you also asked a question about restricted licenses. If licenses came back to the city, could we restrict them to certain neighborhoods? And I'm going to pass that on to the chair of the Boston Liquor License to give you a proper response. Kathleen?
Hi, thank you. I think all of these questions and statements point to the fact we should continue to have these conversations. But as far as the restricted licenses in the current legislation, they would have to go back to the neighborhoods that if they were returned to us, the neighborhoods they came from. That's not the case with the 2006 legislation. So any restricted license is tied to a specific piece of legislation. If it comes back to the board, we have to see what category of license this is. Is it a 2006 or 2014? There's no strings attached to the 2006 if they go back to a particular neighborhood, but for 2014 licenses, they do have to go back to the neighborhood they came from if they are returned to the board. We can't do that with a license that's purchased on the open market. If something's purchased, in East Boston or Jamaica Plain and then goes to downtown, we don't have the legal authority to restrict that transfer. It's a private transaction on the open market.
Thank you. Chief Barrows, were there other questions you needed to or wanted to address?
I think my
If
general,
not, we can go ahead.
those were the specifics. I think my general comments actually applied to other points that were made.
Councilor Baker, you had a specific question towards the end for Chief?
Yeah, I've been hearing the percentage 25% of restaurants. Is that accurate, John?
So, Counselor, in the surveying that we did, 46% of the small businesses that we surveyed are now closed. And so I will look at that information to see if we have a specific business type and get back to you on the percentages of those businesses that are restaurant or food-based.
Thank you.
Before I turn it over to either the chief or Ms. Joyce, we just want to make sure that of any neighborhood quota, how is the airport licenses impacting that? Of course, I represent East Boston. Is the airport itself able to petition, or when we think of East Boston licenses total? I just want to be clear, and I understand now the way you think about it. You look at the legislation that created them, and then there's open market. So if there is, yeah, I see, Ms. Joyce, but just making sure I'm clear on my question. If there's a quota put out for East Boston under any legislation, how's the airport count in that quota? And then on the open market, I guess it doesn't really matter. So Ms. Joyce, unless the chief,
Sure.
Ms. Joyce.
The airport licenses don't go towards the cap at all.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, so we had several folks join us and who would like to testify, I'm sure. I think there's an app that allows you to raise your hand, but we had also specifically asked folks from the industry to come and speak on both of the matters or give their opinion about what's going on. You don't have to be bound to the specific dockets. Would love to hear as industry folks what you are dealing with. This is an opportunity to really expose that. And also your ideas for recovery in as much as how these liquor licenses will be part of that or not or shouldn't. So I do see right now I have, I'm looking on the camera, but I do see I have Mr. Bob Luz, apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name. We have folks from East Boston's Quiet View. And I see we have, let's see, just making sure I see a Candace Morales, Stephen Clark, Sagoon from BECMA. And so I think there's an app that allows you to raise your hands, but that's just what I can see through scrolling through. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn this over to Mr. Luz, I apologize. And would love to get your feedback. And then after you, I'll continue on, okay? Bob? If we can unmute Bob, 1 second, Bob, you're still muted. If we can unmute Bob.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think I'm unmuted now. Okay.
Yep.
So I'll start by saying I'm not going to thank you for having me here today because frankly, I'm not believing that we're doing this, and I'm going to apologize because part of what I'm going to say now is going to come off a little angry. I got to tell you that I'm dismayed that given the current situation, and let me take a step back. This process started in January. Well, it started 6 or 7 years ago. There was a sunrise with Ayanna Pressley, to be honest with you. But this process may have started in January. We proceeded forward. And I'm really disturbed by the lack of respect to the fact that there needed to be continued scheduling of this, given everything that's going on and the disaster that we are in as a country, as a state, as a city, and as an industry. And as you just heard Chief Barrows say, there's no industry that's been higher affected than the restaurant industry, restaurant, hotel, hospitality industry. I asked for this to be pushed off. I would have thought it would have been common sense that we needed to do that. I will also tell you that going back to the sunrise of this, as Councilor O'Malley talked about, I think it was 6 or 7 years ago when Councilor Pressley at the time first brought up, we supported her in her initial approval, and as you know, in her initial proposal for underserved neighborhoods. And as you know, as it's grown over the years, and today we're at 184, maybe more. I don't know if we added some more today. We are not in favor of that, and that's history. But to think that we would expect owners to come out today to take time away from what they're trying to do to talk about expanding liquor licenses, quite honestly, is a slap in the face to everybody that's trying to get through day to day right now. Our owners and myself, and right before this, I just spent an hour and a half on a conference call between Housing and Economic Development Secretary Keneally, Undersecretary Mark Fuller, and the Massachusetts Restaurant Association Board of Directors, just on how we're going to get people to come out of this. Right now, our owners are helping employees get their unemployment, connect them with programs that are helping the most vulnerable. They're trying to negotiate the extremely complicated federal loan program. They're preparing to maybe, and again, we're holding this at noontime, so some of those who have been able to try and figure out how to open up for to go, maybe if they didn't do it before, they're trying to do that, so they're not unable to be here. They're trying to negotiate with landlords to say, hey, I got no revenue coming through the door. How do we do this? On March 16th, this industry put 300,000 people out of work. 300,000 people in Massachusetts. That's mind-boggling. Through March 22nd, and that's what I have strong data on, the industry in Massachusetts lost $583 million in sales. There were over 85,000 people that first week had filed for unemployment. It's way over that now. We are, the responsible thing to me, and I asked that this be postponed because I thought it was the responsible thing to do. At the very least, it should have pivoted to say, how do we help and save this industry? Councilor Baker talked about, is the 25% number real? You know what? I hope to God it is, because I fear it is going to be far, far higher than that. This industry has seen stuff that no one could have even imagined. And when we get the light back on that says, okay, it's okay to open, and by no means am I banking on that going to be May 4th. When we get that ability to start to open, it is going to be such a long ramp up time for this industry to get anywhere close to levels of sales that they used to have. The entire dining room is going to have to be remapped. It's going to have to be laid out totally different. At best, operators are going to get to between 50 and maybe, if they're lucky, as high as 65% of capacity from where they were before. You're not going to be able to have people to wait to go in, because that's not going to be allowed. There should only be one question now. The fact, and Chief Barrows actually said it, he said, maybe we should be hitting pause and revisiting this in a few months. That's responsible. That's what leaders do to lead. The fact that we're having this really is beyond my belief. And, I'm happy to answer any questions. And I apologize for my anger, but my anger comes about by the fact that the things we're talking about today takes out of account every operator, every owner inside the city of Boston that's trying to keep his or her employees going, that's trying to reopen and trying to have a future for themselves. The other thing I will say, and this is important to understand because you asked about the status of the industry, Boston is actually underperforming the rest of the state in terms of takeout and the ability to do that. And the reason is because there are so many restaurants inside of Boston. It's the highest, obviously, density in the whole state. So there's so many of them, number one. Two, we have no workers, we have no business travelers, we have no conventions, we have no sports, we have no culture, we have no ability to get in and out of town easily. The places out in the suburbs actually are doing okay, and okay is a very relative term, at trying to do some takeout and keep a light on and keep a handful of people employed. But inside the four walls of the city, that is far different story. So I would hope and respect the fact that the council do what Chief Barrows talked about right up at the start and say, maybe we should be hitting the pause button, and maybe we should be coming and revisiting this in a few months. Because again, we're far, far way out from even being remotely close to being able to say, we hope that restaurants can survive. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And I apologize for getting a little emotional.
So we have what I see, one, two, three additional folks representing different businesses or perspectives. It might make sense to go ahead and let each one of them speak. And then if the council and the folks wanted to respond or ask them individual questions, it would be I think a little bit more efficient. Up next I have, I don't know who from the quiet few would like to speak. Okay, I see. Josh with the Eastie hat on. So we can unmute his microphone. Carrie from the quiet few.
Oh,
Okay.
I'm unmuted by host. Yeah, hi, I'm Josh from the Quiet Few in East Boston. I agree and sympathize with the emotion that was just spoken about. This is definitely uncharted waters and just a crazy time. We've been flooded with emotions just based on what to do for staff, what to do for ourselves, and what to do for our future. Especially because we have 85% of our employees living in East Boston, and half of our employees that are unable to collect unemployment, even though they do pay taxes, and it's frustrating. Some of these loans and grants, if we're able to get them, hopefully will help that, because we want to take care of our staff. Thus far, we have not opened for takeout or delivery. It was something that was not in our permitting when we opened, because of giant loopholes and issues we had navigating the city of Boston. So we weren't prepared to do takeout or delivery. And honestly, and this is just from where we stand, I totally get why places would want to do it, but we feel that if we just really hit pause and stop giving anybody an excuse to leave their home, we'll get to the other side of this faster. That is just me personally, and I totally appreciate and get the other side of that too, because places do need to make money, and we're figuring out how to do that. We have a community that really is backing us right now, and that's helping get us through this. And if it continues into June, into July, maybe we'll change our tune. But I don't feel safe working those shifts, and I don't want any employees working a shift that I wouldn't work. That being said, and we've spoken internally with our bar about this, and we feel it's also important to continue to move forward and consider the future and what the future holds, as far as, you know, if however what percentage restaurants close, and that's that percentage of that 300,000 employees that need new employment. And if more licenses are made available and new places are able to open up, that's more jobs that are available. And I believe that just because a license is made available doesn't necessarily mean that it will be taken, but it does show that, you know, I appreciate this hearing, because I think it is important that we not only focus on right now, but also focus on the future as well. And that future is, how do we, you know, just keep moving forward, which is scary, but is big for us. We want to keep moving forward. I do have a couple questions and comments, just notes I've been taking, if I can. I'm curious about that transportation permit that's been lifted. While it's not something we're currently doing, we understand that when we are able to open back up, our capacity will probably be cut dramatically. Will that transportation permit be lifted through 3 months, 6 months, a year after we're able to open back up? We have a capacity of 49 because we have 2 exits. That does not include staff. But my guess is that since this new capacity will be Corona-based, not fire-based, it will include staff. So now that cuts our, we run with 3 or 4 staff members at a time, but that cuts, instead of going from 49 people, now we can allow 19 or 20. So if we are able to continue to offer takeout, and we're prepared to offer takeout with, you know, takeout containers and bags and that kind of stuff that we didn't have already in house. My hope is that permit will be lifted, so we can continue to do that as we get our, try to navigate how we get our business back up and running. So that's my hope, that lift continues. The response, I just feel like these are in no real order, just sort of notes I've been taking, back to licensing and talking about moving forward. I feel the response to our closing and just the overall flooding of residential in East Boston just means that these licenses are so much more important sooner rather than later. There are people now, I mean, you know, if you moved here in January, you moved here in September, there were, due to licenses, there were limited offerings for food and beverage then, and now there's going to be even less when we open back up. And if you've just moved here, getting around, getting food, getting to know your community has been hurt in that regard too. So another reason why I appreciate the consideration for more licenses now. I've already said that more licenses for new businesses offer more jobs to be available quicker, hopefully. And I've already touched on it, but again, I want to just reiterate the fact that, you know, mostly our back of house staff has been really affected by this. And it boggles my mind that they pay taxes on their wages every year and they are not able to collect unemployment. That just really hurts my heart. And I just think it's wrong. That's pretty much it. Purchase of transferable licenses and all that stuff. This may be asked out of ignorance, but if more licenses become available means that certain licenses decrease in value, I don't know if there's an opportunity for the city to buy those back and then they become city owned and move from transferable to non-transferable, and then they don't lose that initial value. That could be speaking out of ignorance. I don't know how all your jobs work. I just know how mine works. And I thank you for the time and consideration.
Thank you very much. I think Sagoon had to leave, but I have Ms. Haskins on the line. Leslie? Hello?
Nope, this is Leslie Delaney Hawkins with the board. I don't have anything to add.
Okay, all right. I just want to make sure. So, and I don't think Sagoon, he was from BECMA, which was, I understand his testimony was submitted in writing. He submitted that, but it was about the equity analysis of the licenses. So beyond looking at it at the neighborhood level, what's the city or legislation going to do to actually look at the impact and who actually accesses them? So if he might join us later, he had to go to another meeting. But I don't know if Chief Barrows had some comments or response to any of the testimony. Also, any of my city councilors, I will just go in order that we came in again and just check in with you if you have questions for the participants. So Chief, and then we're going to go to the councilors.
No, I want to affirm the emotions we hear. This is so Bob's emotion, Quiet Few's emotion on this is that's what we're hearing from the businesses, what we're hearing from the small businesses. I think Bob's comment that we would be lucky if it's 25%, given the percentages that we're seeing now. I think that's right. I think we would be lucky if it's 25%. It really does look dire right now. I want to talk specifically to the questions that the Quiet Pew asked. Sorry, brother, I don't know your name, but we refer to you as
Josh
the Quiet
Weinstein.
Pew.
I apologize. It's Josh.
Josh, thank you. So Josh asked the question: can we offer takeout afterwards? And so, Josh, I think we're gonna have to do things like that for a while to help businesses get back on their feet, right? And so the mayor has been he's already talking to us about a plan for recovery. We're clearly focused on right now, and he's doing a press conference right now and announcing some things, but he has us working on the right now and the recovery. And so recovery is important. I can't announce anything today. It would be premature, but we hear you loud and clear, and we are going to make sure that there are the kind of incentives in licensing and permitting that allows for businesses to get back on their feet. I think that's a good request from you. And then the opportunity for the city to buy licenses. I think that's a good thought. Let's continue to talk about it, think about it, and see what happens there. I would have to look at it from a legal standpoint. I'm not sure what we cannot do, but we'll flush it out internally. But thanks for asking that question.
Ms. Joyce, did you have by any chance a response for that?
I just want to echo Chief Barrows's comments. The transportation permit, I think, has been key to the smaller businesses that have wanted to do the waiver of it, have wanted to do delivery. And your comments and questions really do raise an important issue. How can we help you moving forward, even after the state of emergency is officially lifted? So we will consider that.
So I'm going to just go now to my colleagues as we did before for comments, questions to everybody now present. Councilor at Large, Councilor Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And obviously I appreciate the comments, and I understand how frustrated folks are and the passion that folks bring to the table, advocating on behalf of restaurants and hospitals and hotels and in our service industry. So appreciate that. And just really, I just want to go back to Chief Barrows. At one point, there was a comment about sort of the takeout, beer and wine takeout. So I felt that I was on that early, working with our mayor and the governor. Obviously, you weighed in as well and were helpful in making that a reality. But I just want to be clear that if this had passed, say, 6 months ago, or when it started, 4 or 5 years ago, that wouldn't have an immediate impact on people being able to deliver alcohol with food deliveries. That was going to require either a special act or an executive order. So I just want to make sure that we were clear on that. I wanted people getting the wrong impression that it had these 184 licenses been already online, that would have somehow expedited the owners, the restaurant owners' ability that are transitioning to takeout to be able to serve beer and wine with those food orders. That was going to be, that's a completely separate tract. And I just want to make sure that we were clear on that. That was not how I heard your comments.
So that wouldn't have expedited the order at all. In fact, that order needed to come from the governor. So the comment, thank you for the clarification. The comment was more so that the order only addresses businesses with licenses. So if you have a beer and wine or all alcohol license, you are able to sell with food through your takeout service or your delivery service. And so if we had more licenses in some of these neighborhoods that are getting really hit hard, we would have in fact had more businesses able to weather the storm today. And that's all I was trying to say. It wouldn't have expedited the order at all. Councilor Edwards, you're on mute.
Yeah, and then thank you very much for that, Chief. And then maybe to Bob, sort of maybe a status report in terms of what you're seeing from your conversations with Boston proprietors as well as statewide proprietors in terms of their viability moving forward. Is there a sort of a conservative estimate that you can give us at today's hearing as to, again, based on your experience, the percentages of businesses that you feel that are currently closed that will not be reopening, or is it too early to say?
I think it's a little bit too early to say. And again, it depends on how long we go. The original closure was for 3 weeks. We now know it's 7 weeks. And I think, most of us here question whether May 4th is going to come and go again. And I think it's rather likelihood. The longer it goes, the more precipitously it falls. It's also bigger than just the restaurants and hotels. It is every business partner that we do business with. These folks got, if I delivered for Costa Produce, to a restaurant, I might have been holding $5,000 worth of bills from the week before. I didn't get paid for that. I had to throw away a bunch of produce that didn't get delivered as a result of everything. And then I'm going to be faced with people that want credit coming out of this. So it is so complicated and so far reaching, it's not even funny. And we're just trying to find our ways through that. And strategically at the Massachusetts Restaurant Association, we got 3 different buckets. What's the immediate need? What's the near term? That's the middle ground. And the bigger one is, what does exit and recovery look like? And it's not pretty. We're really working with the state and the city to say, what is that exit and recovery look like in terms of what we're going to have to comply with, how we're going to be able to get things back up and running. And it's pretty complicated. Again, I think I said it. I think if we were able to limit the losses to 25%, I'd be thanking the good person upstairs because I fear that it's going to be much higher than that.
And Bob, based on how businesses are wired, can you assume whether or not sort of the bigger establishments versus the smaller stuff, like who potentially would be able to bounce back quicker and just based on sort of the business models? Is it going to be that smaller neighborhood establishment, or is it going to sort of be that bigger restaurant that's, might be attached to, the first floor of a hotel, et cetera. And my only concern there is I think when this is over, there'll be, for lack of a better word, I guess there'll be a lull, there'll be a hangover, if you will. But when people are allowed to kind of go back to normal, I think they'll still be a little hesitant to sort of attend that conference or to go out to a specific bar or restaurant. That's just my sense on it. And that maybe push the sort of the recovery a little further on down for the restaurant and bar establishment. Or it could be a mad dash, the green light's there and everyone's going to be, because they've been cooped up in their homes, they're going to run out to, their local favorite establishment and get after it, if you will. So again, whether it's going to be the bigger steakhouse or the bigger chain, and they're going to have a better success rate than say the mom and pop and smaller neighborhood establishment, or again, is it too early to say? I kind of want to get a sense, because we need to start to for sort of when we get out of this, and is the attention to detail going to be on the smaller neighborhood establishments, or do we need to sort of go after and triage the bigger folks, the bigger places with the larger number of employees? I just really don't know how to assess that.
So
thanks,
Counselor. I mean, it's a good question. The reality is, I think the larger chains, if you would, probably are better funded and have better systems, quite honestly, to kind of maneuver through this. And again, not that they have a plan for it, because no one did, but they have probably a more solid footing and a more solid ability to be able to try and maneuver through this. The independent operators, it's far more risky and wrought with peril, quite honestly. The industry, as you know, because you and I have had this discussion, there's not a lot of barriers to entrepreneurship in our industry. It really offers a lot of paths for that, but it's a very small margin business, and there's not a lot in the coffers for these folks. They live week to week, paycheck to paycheck. They can, they're used to having to migrate around, a weekend with a snowstorm. They're not used to having to migrate around 7 weeks closed minimally, plus all the other problems that come with it. And that's if we're open in 7 weeks. So the mom and pops that really make up the fabric of our communities, the fabric of our neighborhoods and the fabric of this industry are at greatest risk, no question about it.
Thank you, Bob. And I see the establishment owners are sort of nodding. So is that your sense as well, in terms of if you see sort of an up? So Bob, I was just speaking to the two gentlemen. I see the establishment owners are also, they're nodding in agreement. So I guess the owners, the establishment owners, is that your sense as well that sort of an infusion of additional licenses is not in the best interest of proprietors?
No. You can unmute the quiet view.
So I think the question was expanding liquor licenses at this point. Again, I think it would be irresponsible for us to do that. We've got to have a total focus on saving what's out there and coming up with plans that can assist these owner operators to kind of navigate from point A to point B, and to say to them, hey, we're going to make the road far more difficult by putting more licenses right next to you, doesn't make a lot of sense. If there were a case where we're faced with, food islands that were talked about, neighborhoods that are totally underserved, which again, we've been positively behind that the whole time. That to me is a separate cause. That's, look, if we can get something that spurs some economic development, in a Mattapan, we should do that and should find a way to do it. That's separate. But, to think about putting 184 more licenses in the city of Boston right now, come on. We got to try and get 184 members through this.
Just a point of clarification, I believe Councillor Flaherty, you were trying to talk also to the owners of the quiet few as well.
Yeah.
Just unmuted. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm nodding my head in agreement that this is just all crazy and scary and sucks, and it's tough to figure out. Like the examples given are both true, but I also think it's case by case. If the business model and the size is such that it can be operated, the business can be operated by 2 people, then that place, that might be a mom and pop place, but that also might be a place that survives this. Whereas some of these bigger hotel chains that might have more of an influx of money also means that they've got more staff, more employees, and more people that they need in-house to make the show run. And so it might be tougher for them. I don't think there's definitely a definite case of who's gonna survive and who's not just based on size. I think it's really all circumstantial.
Having the
That's-
availability to be able to have our chance to bounce back from this too is also incredibly important. I mean,
Right.
being able to provide the businesses with an opportunity to thrive, or somebody was about to open and was struggling to get a license. Unfortunately, these times and these days now, it's probably that future is bleak, but with the opportunity to have a license available now could also change that story.
Mhm.
So you support having the additional, or a conversation about having additional licenses? I think
Yes.
that's what
Mhm.
Councilor Flaherty was trying to figure out.
Yes, wholeheartedly support it.
Okay. Councilor Flaherty, did you?
Yeah,
if
thank you.
not, I
No,
can
thank
go-
you, Madam Chair. No, I appreciate it. Just want to get some feedback.
Councilor
you.
Flynn? I'm sorry, Councilor Flynn's still here?
Thank you,
Councilor
Council. I had a comment and a question. A lot of the restaurants in my district have been devastated, especially the ones on West Broadway or East Broadway or Chinatown area in the south end. But what I wanted to highlight too about these restaurants, they also are a major part of the neighborhood, and they help finance, they help support so many nonprofits and charities. They help our sports teams. They provide exceptional support to families in need. They provide employment for our workers. So not only do we lose the restaurant, but we lose a lot of that stability in our neighborhood that restaurant provides. And that's a big loss. So my question is, factoring that in, if we were to go forward and put several hundred more licenses on the street for those restaurants that are already struggling, that may have to go out of business, what impact does that have on the restaurants that had to close with their license? What does that mean for that license? And also factoring in, if a new restaurant came into a new location, isn't the fact of over 50% of restaurants closed within the first year still accurate? So I just want to make sure that we have a long-term discussion to make sure that we know exactly what we're doing and provide the current restaurants, the current bars, providing them with the support that they need to get back up off their feet, because they provide an exceptional service to our residents, and they employ a lot of people. I talk to them all the time: dishwashers, cooks, bartenders. Those are the people I like to talk to, and they're not making a lot of money, but they're making money, enough money. Might be their second job, might be their third job, but they're making money to put food on the table for their kids. And that's what really Boston is all about. It's that hard work, grit, determination, and that fighting attitude. So I just want to make sure that we can get these restaurants back up off the ground, and continue allowing them to provide exceptional services in our communities.
So I don't know that there's a question there, Councilor Flynn, but I appreciate your comments. There's no doubt. Restaurateurs, restaurants are the fabric of every neighborhood, certainly the neighborhood you're in. And you and I sat with Michelle Wu and several other councilors down in Chinatown when this first started. You know, there's no industry that is as philanthropic as the restaurant chef community. They give back to their neighborhoods like there's no tomorrow. They're there in good times and bad. People celebrate and they mourn in our restaurants. They bring the community together. And so that's why right now, I think more than ever, we need our cities and towns, our neighbors to rally around those that hopefully can get through this and help them get to the other side. Back to the point that the other gentlemen were making, it really does, there's no easy, straightforward answer as to who makes it, who doesn't. It really depends on each and every situation. But make no bones about it, the business model for a restaurant in the last 4 weeks changed dramatically. Again, at best, a restaurant will be able to open between 50 and 65% of their seating capacity of what it was before. During this time, we are training America or Massachusetts, wherever you are, that eating takeout is not a bad option. And takeout will become a much bigger percentage of sales going forward for two reasons. One, our residents are seeing, hey, I can get a pretty good meal and stay at home. And then two, there's a fear factor that's still going to be out there, or not wanting to wander out into crowds, if you would, per se. The takeout experience is far less profitable. It's a nice little add-on business, and when it's just a little piece of the business for restaurants, but it's not a model that sustains itself at the size of a restaurant is to sell their food to go. You get no ability to add on the rest of the sales that normally goes with it. So it really dramatically changes the business model for restaurants. And we've got to be really, really understanding of that. And as I said before, even when we get the light on to start to go back out, it's going to take months to fill restaurants, even at that diminished capacity. So I'd like to think everybody will rush right back in when this is over. It's just highly unlikely. Everybody will rush out to buy a hairdryer or to get a dishwasher because theirs broke during this time, or those things they'll do. But going into a crowded restaurant with a lot of people you don't know, probably going to take a little bit of time before we feel comfortable doing that.
Councilor Edwards, I
Flynn?
don't have any further. Yeah, Councilor
Okay.
Edwards, I don't have any further questions. I just want to say thank you to the panelists and for the guests for being here.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to go on to Councilor Janey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have any questions. Just wanted to offer my empathy. I know how difficult this is and how devastating it is. I'm facing it within my district, which is a district that already has baked in inequities. And so I know the challenges are real. I applaud the efforts of all, particularly those who are restaurant owners, who are standing in this gap, and certainly want to thank the administration, Chief Barrows, for your work. Ms. Joyce, thank you. Thank you to all of my colleagues, and look forward to continuing to work to ensure not only that we get through this crisis immediately before us, but that we are also tackling the existing inequities that has led to a $250,000 wealth gap. within the city of Boston. So look forward to continuing that conversation and working with all of you on those issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor O'Malley? You may have stepped away. Just going on then to Counselor Sabi George. She may have also stepped away and asked for questions earlier. Just checking. Okay. I had a few questions, and I wanted to acknowledge first for Counselor Flynn, and his district especially has faced a double burden in this moment of the virus, because he represents proudly and with all of his heart represents Chinatown. And so it isn't just the pandemic that closed their doors. There was a lot of horrible racism and horrible, it was just disgusting. The anti-Asian American bias that came as a result from even some political leaders, but especially how people responded to amazing businessmen, amazing Americans who were dedicated to our community for generations, all of a sudden were treated like the other, and their businesses were no good and their food was no good. And so I wanted to acknowledge that it's, part of the recovery. Those particular businesses have been hit hard. Especially a lot of them are mom and pops, a lot of them are small, and then having to add this plus the fact that who they are was used against them in this moment. So their recovery, I just want to acknowledge that in Councilor Flynn's work and highlighting a lot of that to begin with. We signed on to a resolution. With regards to just some general questions, I'm curious for in terms of recovery, is there a license amount that the proprietors would feel comfortable with in terms of adding at all? I mean, I'm just curious, if 184 is way too much, is Councilor Baker's suggestion of let's just do 3 per neighborhood right now in 1 year, that's maybe the extreme to the other way, but is that what makes sense to say, okay, well, we do need maybe something for recovery. We do need something to point to that said that's on its way. Is that something that makes sense to people at this point? So that's my first question. And then adding to this is to the administration, I guess, or to also Councilor Baker. Would it make sense to, if you're open to an amendable home rule petition, that means for those who are listening, we pass something, but understand it will not be verbatim what we get from the State House. We're giving them permission to kind of play with it at the State House. Would you be okay with it being amended to say that it doesn't begin until after the state of emergency or the declaration of a state of emergency is ended? As in, yes, we agree to pass and expand liquor licenses, pick a number. We think that number makes sense, but that expansion will not become effective until the state of emergency in this particular crisis moment has been removed by the governor. And or is there a date certain saying a year from now we can have those licenses? And I also wanted to, I don't know if it could be done in this part of legislation, but I do think it's worth acknowledging that there might need to be a restaurant recovery package, a home rule petition that we need to put together that is separate from this, or maybe part of this, that looks at not just what licenses, but also, as the quiet few members noted, keeping the takeout delivery and expanding that and continuing that on and saying, we actually think that actually helps a small business maybe start and get off the ground. So we actually think that would be helpful for the recovery package. And anything else that this folks can think of in terms of an immediate recovery package for restaurant industry folks. I've heard the calls, for example, about unemployment at the state level, at least, Josh, that we would have more control over some of that money for some workers, and looking at how that might work. So I know it's a big thing, but I'll just separate it again. I just acknowledge the issues that Chinatown specifically is dealing with. I asked about what number would work for the folks, if one at all works. And then in terms of what we send up, I'm wondering if we send something up with a number but said it doesn't become effective, it doesn't impact the industry until after the state of emergency is over with, and or just do a whole separate recovery package. So we can go to Bob, then the quiet few, if that's okay, before we go to the admin.
Okay, so, well, I can't be any more emphatic. I don't think there should be any new licenses
Okay.
in communities that are already serviced. I think there should only be, to your point, a pivot to say, how do we help restaurants recover? And that should be the sole focus, and it would be applauded. It would be backed by the public. It would be backed by the restaurateurs, and it would be thoughtful and well done. In an area where there are virtually no restaurants, to come forward and say, hey, we actually have someone that wants to do a restaurant, has some wherewithal, and we want to get it done, we will help those people. There's a process to go through that's called home rule petition. Let them get a license that way. We'll back them. We have said that since day one. But to say that we need more in West Roxbury, we've got restaurants. Look, the other thing that's going to happen here, if 25 to 40% of the restaurants fail, and we know that number is probably very, very real. And again, I hope it's on the much lower number, but that's going to have a dramatic impact on the cost of the licenses. There's going to be a ton of them available. When supply goes up, the price goes down. And so, look, let's just focus on what's in front of us, which is you have people that, and Councilor Flynn just talked about it, that are the fabric of the community, that employ our neighbors, that employ our families, and that give back to communities like there's no tomorrow. Now's the time to be saying, what the heck can we do to help those people? And it's not putting a new license next to them. It is beyond Thunderdome that we would be thinking about doing that. Could I be any more clear?
So we're just going to unmute the quiet few.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I don't necessarily think that if there's new licenses available that they necessarily have to go to a new startup. I agree. I believe that a bar and a restaurant is where the neighborhood begins. As a cornerstone to a neighborhood, and getting those places up and running are paramount. There's plenty of restaurants by me. I live in East Boston. There's plenty of restaurants by me that don't have a liquor license, and maybe, if they're serving sandwiches and trying to stay afloat, but now can get one of these licenses that's just been made available, and now they can serve a 6-pack of beer with what they're selling, that only helps them. There's Toasted Flats a couple blocks away, and there's Dirty Water that just opened that has great pizza, and I know that they've already started their process for applying for a beer and wine license. So as they're a newer business, we are too. We're not even a year old. But when we started with the thought of, okay, can we do this? Can we get off the ground and get our doors open without a liquor license? Because we weren't sure that we were going to be able to get one. And if this had just happened, we wouldn't have been able to open. But if we were in the middle of this and one became available now, and it's a free license, that only helps us with how we try to navigate takeout and delivery. It doesn't necessarily mean that these all have to go to new places. They can go to existing places trying to get their doors back open. And also, when you think of 150 or 184, that is a large number. I agree, but that's over the span of 5 years, as I understand it. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's about roughly 38 licenses a year for doled out between 7, 8 neighborhoods. Is my math completely off, or is that sort of close?
About that.
Okay.
About that.
So it's not I just don't see it as something that happens now. I think Councilor Baker's idea of just like a home rule and the 2 and 1, 3 total is would suffice too. But anything that gives businesses the ability to do it. If this had happened last year, this would have happened 2 weeks before we opened our doors, and we would not have opened. And if there was any availability for us to anything that could help, and that could have been a liquor license had we opened just for food, I would have welcomed it.
especially with the availability now of being able to offer takeout with beer and wine. That scenario continues beyond us being able to hopefully open our doors again beyond May 4th, which we all hope that day is what's going to happen. Having the smaller mom and pop businesses, especially in the area like East Boston, the ability to sell beer and wine will only increase their sales and then keep everybody happy. If that continues, of course. And I'm Scott, by the way.
Thank you. So the administration, I don't know if you had any response to the amendability of and waiting till the state of emergency is removed or to start your home rule.
I do want to echo that. I think right now we should be focused on making sure that the restaurants that are struggling are assisted. I want to echo what I think I've heard from all three proprietors on the phone, and Bob's right. I mean, I think the model of restaurants has dramatically changed, and I've been struggling in my head as we've provided guidance to restaurants on how to start takeout and delivery businesses, how to create something that's more profitable there, because behaviors are going to change, and for the food establishments, that means it's more online, that means it's more delivery, that means it's more takeout, and to the extent that our food companies understand how to do that efficiently, but most importantly profitably, then they've got some hope in this sort of in coming back. And let me be clear, I see you, Bob. I think Scott, you made the point. Hopefully we open by May 4th, right? And I think Bob had countered that point earlier. I might be siding with Bob. I think there's a surge coming of those who are infected. These next 2 weeks are really important for us to buckle down, and I applaud the folks at Quiet View for saying we shut our doors to help us to get to the other side, right? And that's a powerful statement. That other side, I think, unfortunately, is probably not May 4th. I think if we do well, though, it's quicker than it would have been if we don't behave right and do it wrong. But so I do think, Counselor, to your point, we would love to support something immediately that is beyond liquor licenses, that helps restaurants continue to move in a direction that makes them viable as we get to the other side of this. And clearly something amenable going to the state works. We still think liquor licenses could be a tool for people to recover, but we understand that the focus right now might be something more immediate for the folks out there that we could do, and we're here to do that as well.
Thank you. Before I turn it over to you, Bob, I did want to make sure Frank, who's the last city councilor, asked his questions to you and to the other restaurant folks, and then I will go back to you, okay? Just thumbs
Counselor,
up.
I apologize. Counselor Edwards, I apologize. I have to get off the call. This
okay.
is but
Thank you
I'll
for
get back to you.
as long as you could.
No, yeah, we tried to stay. Kathleen and I both have a conflict and we have to get off, but Neil is here, who's the liaison to the mayor's office, and we look forward to actually seeing this. We know this is being recorded live.
Is there any way, Frank or Councilor Baker, do you have any quick questions for the administration that you need to ask? No, okay, all right then. So thank you so much, John. Thank you so much, Kathleen, for joining us for as long as you did. We really acknowledge the amount of work that you're doing right now for everybody. So thank you. We really appreciate this.
Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you. Councilor Baker, did you have any other questions for the proprietors?
Well, just kind of a quick statement. I actually opened up a 20-seat restaurant 6 months after 9/11 and sold it in 2009 after the crash. So I feel
great timing.
I went through it. I personally lived it. I think as a body, I would like to be moving forward, knowing that the mayor's legislation is tabled, and even though I'm torn with my own legislation, the 3 licenses, because I don't know if we're going to even need it. I hope we do need it, But to speak to Bob's point a little bit, to get into, to identify 1 or 2 or 3 restaurants that may be able to get in line and there wasn't a license available to them, the fact of doing a home rule there, it's not really doable, which is what I think we're trying to do here, is just hold that
Right.
placeholder, because we know the legislative, excuse me, session ends in June, I believe. So if we want to get this passed for next year, so they're available as a tool, would need to get this up to the legislation quickly, which is why I wanted to amend my simplified legislation and also bring the number way down. So they would be there available just in case, not really a question or anything, but, and again, my feelings won't be hurt if mine gets tabled. Also, if we come across the next week, we realize that the need is definitely not going to be there. So just a couple thoughts to kind of wrap my part of this.
Frank, I have a question about your legislation.
Yeah.
Would you be amendable to having the language so that we are not putting something forward before it's ready? If we were to say to be enacted or to be available after the state of emergency is.
I'm totally fine with that. Again, I'm thinking of, someone that may be a very small operation that may own their own building, and be able, because if in my restaurant I lose 5 restaurants, that's every restaurant in my neighborhood. So if there's someone there positioned and can open, I'd like to be able to help them. So, and again, I don't know if it's the right thing. I'm torn, but I don't want someone that will be ready in 6 months in September or October. If they are ready, we're going to have so few people looking to open anything up. If someone's ready, I want to be able to serve their needs. So, but I absolutely see Bob's point. We run the risk of turning this into the taxi industry, they were trading at $300,000-$400,000 a medallion 5 years ago. The restaurants anywhere from $300,000 to $450. I mean, I don't know what the licenses were going to. So we absolutely are going to take money out of people's pocket, and I do that. I take that very serious.
Frank, another suggestion or question I have is, if you, I remember the Josh had mentioned, Josh had mentioned that there were, one of the biggest concerns I've heard from you, Flaherty, and also Bob, is that flooding the market and new businesses being able to slip in with literally a tenth of the cost that other folks had to in order to get their businesses up. At the same time, in East Boston, I have a little family style Colombian restaurant that's tried for 12 years to get a liquor license. So would it make sense to limit those 3 licenses a neighborhood to already existing restaurants, so that they've already kind of done the thing, they're there, and they're just trying to continue on, and then versus, because I think one of the concerns is a startup business could come in and just take everything, or compete unfairly. I don't know. This is me just literally asking you.
Well,
you've done the restaurant stuff. I'm asking.
Yeah, in my neighborhood, we're going to need that new restaurant, I think, because a lot of them are going to close. But that being said, would there be one of the neighborhood licenses there available when they're ready to open?
True.
So I am totally open to whatever changes people think will allow us to.
Councilor Flaherty wanted to get in?
Yeah, just the other play there's only a 1-year moratorium. So for example, say I own an establishment in a neighborhood that's, that maybe a little tired and in need of, some significant renovations. What I would do is I would sell the license on the open market. I would take a year basically and refurbish and renovate my entire restaurant, and then I just apply for the freebie. That's going to be the play moving forward for a lot of the older neighborhood establishments, those family businesses. And quite frankly, if I was advising them, that's what I would advise them to do. I would say, well, take advantage, capitalize on the existing market for your license, shut down, make the necessary repairs to your bar, to your restaurant, to your bathrooms, to your fire suppression systems, all of it, and then come back online. And quite frankly, that type of construction project and renovation project would probably take about a year, and then you're back up and running and you get a freebie, and that will happen. So I think one thing we need to talk about is moving that 1 year back a little further, so that we don't see that type of activity. But
Councilor Flaherty, just a direct question to you. Do you have a number you're comfortable with? Was Frank's suggestion?
I think Frank, I think is being very thoughtful
Mhm.
in light of what we're dealing with now with the effects and future impacts in COVID-19. Clearly, the goal here in the very beginning from day one was the food deserts. So let's go back to where it started. Let's go back and identify where those food deserts are and take Frank's version and weave the two of them together. There's no doubt about it. We have food deserts in the city of Boston. We need to address that. And then Frank obviously has taken the very thoughtful step to say, hey, I recognize the new state of affairs here, and we don't know where this is going to take us. And we obviously need to partner and support our existing businesses, which I think what we heard some from Bob. We have an existing portfolio of businesses and companies and employees that we really need to address those folks first. And maybe we kind of partner Frank's piece with the food desert piece. What happened, again, for everyone's edification, we started off this discussion about food deserts, and as well-intentioned as it was, what happened was everybody piled on citywide. And we started to see licenses going down to the South Boston waterfront, down to the North End, into the downtown. Quite frankly, that's not where the need for investment is. The need for the investment is out at Upham's Corner and Grove Hall and Mattapan Square. All day long, the industry, the folks that are on the front lines, the folks that I'm looking at the screen here, that are actually doing the work, and the proprietors, they supporting the food deserts. They recognize the value in doing that. Somehow, some way, we got off track, and we're now talking about 184 licenses, which basically will flood this market. So if we could maybe dial it back, pump the brakes on some of this, get back to the food desert concept, there will be buy-in citywide, particularly for all of our partner proprietors and neighbors and friends, and then kind of weave in Frank's that provides some additional opportunity so we can continue to move forward as a city, but we won't do something that's catastrophic for existing businesses, 20 to 25% of which may not be existing, moving forward. And as Chief Barros recognized it, 75% of the small businesses have lost 50% of the revenue, and 46% of the businesses are now closed. And so huge hurdles for us to be able to get out from underneath and to move forward. And I think a very thoughtful compromise of going back to the basics on the food deserts, partner it up with Frank's, put something together, I think that would have the support of folks in the industry, small local businesses, as well as the council and the administration. I think that's our best move right now, and that's just my opinion, but thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. I'm going to just check in with any other count. No, I'm sorry, Bob, you've been waiting. Bob? Wait, can we unmute him?
Thank you.
Sorry, Bob.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I too am going to jump because I have a 2 o'clock conference call I'm now late for. But I just wanted to clarify one point so that everybody is understanding. The order that allows beer and wine to be delivered with takeout and to-go deliveries, or pickups or deliveries, is only allowed legislatively until the end of the closure. So once restaurants reopen, that goes away. And it was done specifically to try and assist restaurants to get to the other side, but it was never intended to go on in infinity. So just so you're aware, I just wanted to clarify that for everybody. And I apologize, but I got to jump now.
Thank you very much for participating.
Bye-bye now.
So just so folks are clear, we're going to wrap this up, and I don't know, I'm going to ask Councilor Baker, Councilor Flaherty, if you had any final remarks, and also folks from the quiet view, if you had anything you wanted to say to end this. Councilor Baker?
Yeah, so just Madam Chair, just a quick question from sort of a procedural standpoint. So we're obviously meeting tomorrow. This is obviously Matt has recently heard Is it staying there? Are we doing working, like which, so what are you thinking about next steps?
I was going to
for-
announce all that in my final remarks,
Very good.
but
So I'll
I can
hold
go
my,
now.
no, I'll hold my powder. I just was curious as to
Okay.
what the wrap
I
up was.
appreciate that, though. I do appreciate it. I do appreciate the question. Councilor Baker?
Just thank you for having the hearing, and to my colleagues also coming in, Quiet Few and Bob. Thank you, everybody. Very, very difficult decision we have here. We don't want to hurt people, but we also want to try and help those outlying neighborhoods. Those liquor licenses that we talked about, my neighborhoods have benefited greatly. We have probably 6 or 7 restaurants in my district that weren't there before these licenses, and they've helped to provide life in some of my main streets. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Quiet Few? Any concluding remarks, suggestions, thoughts? No?
No, just thanks for the time.
Thank you, guys. So just as to answer Council Flaherty's question, so as we go forward, normally in the next city council hearing, after a matter, I usually give a report, or you could pull it up for a vote. I'm not going to pull it up for a vote right now. There's just too many good suggestions and amendments pending to warrant us immediately voting to release or to send something up to the State House. I am mindful of the clock ticking at the State House, as Councilor Baker noted. And as councilors, you have our commitment to work very hard to make sure that if we do send something up to the State House, it is something that we're proud of, and it balances the interests of those who are concerned about flooding the market with those who have been waiting, as I know the Quiet Few has, for a liquor license in other places as well. Before this, I mean, this is again a problem that has only been enhanced because there wasn't enough liquor licenses out there. There is a balancing act that a lot of us are going to have to do as legislators, and that's a fact. I wanted to acknowledge, so what will very likely happen, because we have a request to table one legislation, that's the mayor's, and I will check with my colleagues about that. And we also have a request to completely amend Councilor Baker's to limit it to 1 year with 3 licenses per neighborhood, 2 beer and wine, and the other one all alcohol. Councilor Baker, other way around. So excuse me, 2 all alcohol and 1 beer and wine. And with the Councilor Baker noted he is willing to accept language that would say, after the crisis is over, but we are mindful of this time, and I just don't want you to think that we're not thinking about how much people desperately need these licenses. At the same time, we do not. We're kind of blind on this, guys, in terms of what's going to happen in 2, 3, 4 months in terms of this. So we are going to continue this conversation into a working session to make sure that we finish this. And then I will be checking in with both the administration about their version of the liquor license, and with Councilor Baker. Anything we do about this will be public. You will be notified. You can also participate in the next working session and continue conversation. So I want to say thank you to everyone who participated. I'm so sorry, Councilor Janey, if you had any final remarks. I am going to close out otherwise.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate your hearing and a very thoughtful approach.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Nothing
Thank
from
you
me.
very
Thank you so much. Great hearing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, I am closing out the hearing on the 2 dockets 0100 and 0218. Have a good day.
True.
Water bottle, done.